Serious, therapists. What is something people tell you that they are ashamed of but is actually normal? That they do not know what they enjoy doing. Often they have people in their life, including therapists, say try to do something fun today or ask what do you like to do when you have free time? Many people I work with do not know what those are. Once I explain that I dislike these statements/questions because they assume people should know the answer, and that many people don't, I can watch as they relax, take a deep breath, and say something to the effect of, "Oh my, that's so good to hear. I have no idea what I like to do." That's part of the problem. More often than not they feel like they should know and that everyone else their age has it figured out. They are embarrassed to say that they don't know when in fact not knowing is very common. I couldn't even try to count how many clients I've had this conversation with. Having really fucked up thoughts, intrusive, violent or uncomfortable thoughts are very common. I.e., call of the void. For most they are a passing thing like, "Oh, that's weird." But for some they get stuck and people judge themselves for them thinking there is something wrong with them. Mixed or even positive feelings when a loved one dies after a protracted illness, especially someone who hung on for a long time, very sick and suffering, or an older relative with dementia. There's often a feeling of relief, of at least that's over. It's perfectly normal and it doesn't mean you didn't love the person. I've had patients describe their imposter syndrome in great detail, and are genuinely surprised when I say everyone feels like that, myself included sometimes. Having intrusive thoughts, thinking about steering into oncoming traffic is a popular one. Also, when they're talking about inner dialogue people fear I'd consider them psychotic. Edit, for those interested or struggling with intrusive thoughts I highly recommend The Imp of the Mind by L. Bear. It's well written and has some great exercises. Regarding inner negative dialogue, Breaking Negative Thinking Patterns by Gitta Jacobs is generally considered to be a very practical self-help book. They're no substitute for therapy obviously, but I think both can benefit any reader. Feeling conflicted when a caregiver who abused them is exposed/faces consequences. Many express feeling bad for them because this person abused them but they also took care of them, provided for them, etc. I always try to tell them that what they're feeling is normal and understandable but that the abuser needs to face consequences for what they have done. For context, I primarily work with preteens who've experienced sexual abuse. They regret having kids or weren't instantly attached to their child when they were born. It's a lot more common than people think. But the subject is extremely taboo and is not often as discussed due to the shame and guilt that comes with it. Their trauma histories, being conflicted about certain aspects of their abuse, like loving their abuser or not hating all aspects of the abuse, suicidal thoughts, feeling worthless or just not loved. I've also had many clients who hate/refuse to talk about their strengths or what they like about themselves. When you're recovering from an addiction, it's nothing to be ashamed of if you lapse or relapse. It's a part of quitting. It doesn't mean you've failed. And it doesn't mean it's hopeless to try. How much debt they have and the anxiety that it creates it for them, romantic relationships, etc. The reality is a lot of people feel that way but also can become successful at any point, improving their life when people around them are still not doing well. It's easy for people to feel ashamed or guilty when they start making positive changes but see their friends and family not doing the same. Most of my experience is with married couples. Almost everyone is ashamed of fighting, but everyone fights. In fact, conflict can be very healthy for a relationship provided that both people know how to process emotions and work towards resolutions. BTW. Dealing with conflict, particularly in a relationship, is a skill that can be learned. Nobody is just born knowing how to deal with this stuff. Take the time to learn these skills and your life and relationships will be much healthier. Going from my limited experience as an assistant working with mostly very traumatized adults, I get the impression that suicidal thoughts are common. Explained as then I won't have to suffer anymore. Fear and anxiety are two monsters that shape themselves to fit the person experiencing them. But both are also common. A very specific one that many of my residents struggle with is survivor's guilt, meaning they can't get to terms with the fact that others died while traveling together. Edit, a lot of comments talk about suicide as being an option. It is, but it is a bad one. I urge all of you who honestly consider going that route to seek professional help. Death is not the solution to life. I think when people admit that they sometimes make things up, and they're not sure why, sometimes this spirals into stories they have to keep up, especially teenagers, often in the context of talking about negative mental health. Then, parents catch them being happy and they feel they must feel down to keep up appearances. This is quite sad because then the low mood becomes reality, but the person is totally convinced they're faking it, when they are actually feeling quite low. It seems to come from people not having the skills to connect properly with others, or trauma. The sad part is, these people do well if they can. Honestly, I think everyone does. So if they could connect in a healthy way to others they would. But in these cases they can't. So they take what they can get. Being angry at loved ones. This is largely bound in the social idea that somehow anger is an unnecessary, bad emotion. Anger, like any emotion, is adaptive when applied appropriately, i.e., Assertiveness. I get a lot of people who feel like they're a bad person for being angry with friends or family, so they just try to hide it. Pro tip: that shit don't work. Use it. Explain why you were angry in a responsible adult manner, and the relationship will be better off in the long run. And if your thought is that the other person will explode, then you should either reevaluate how you're handling the discussion or whether that person is really worth keeping in your life. As a therapist in the Midwest, by far the most common one I get is being mad at loved ones, especially children. I don't know how many clients I have had shamefully admit that they get angry or even have fleeting feelings that they don't even want their kids when they cry/act up. Note: this is a completely normal reaction and none of them ever follow through, of course. Sometimes I threaten vengeance on the guy who cut me off in traffic, but that doesn't mean I actually want him to die. Your first reaction is automatic and can be driven by stress, being relieved or even happy when a troublesome family member passes. We tell people they always have to be upbeat, full of energy, and not drag people down. And because of that, we have these very important rituals to allow people to be sad and mourn in very specific situations. But if you don't need to mourn the passing of someone who was abusive, or was a real jerk, or who was just a big burden on you, it's normal to not need to follow those rituals. Don't be sad. Don't look for people to tell you that you'll be with them in heaven. Enjoy the feeling of relief. It's okay. Especially when you've been cooped up in a quarantine for almost 2 years and haven't gotten any physical contact, let alone erotic contact of your preferred kind. A lot of heteroromantic people have been launching homoerotic relationships these last few months, feeling guilty about being the first person to make it in a circle of friends and being way better off than everyone else. And inversely, feeling like you failed to launch because people in your friend group have made it while you're still struggling. Life isn't fair. Life isn't always a straight line. False starts can sometimes get you way further than initial successes, and success isn't always happiness. Imposter syndrome is very real as well. No one feels like they know what they're doing, because we're all just children pretending to be adults inside. And there's no one more knowledgeable to turn to that can handle it for you. Surely there must be someone else who is supposed to handle this. We think, but no. We are the adults in the room. We must muddle through it and get it wrong to figure out how to do it right. But everyone assumes they are the only person who feels this way, because everyone else always looks calm and in control all the time. The panic is just hidden within. Oh, and shame at miscarriages. They're so. Seriously, people, when you are part of a couple who has a miscarriage, please talk about it. More people need to pull together to support each other instead of bearing it in silent shame because you think that it only happened to you as a couple. And there must be something wrong with one or both of you. Defying cultural/religious norms that are harmful to them. Running away from home. It's a common fantasy to have as a teenager, that things have gotten worse for them over the pandemic. People are still holding themselves to pre-pandemic standards for stress, loneliness, and frustration, on top of already personalizing failures that are actually societal problems like wage stagnation, inflation, civil rights erosion, etc. People still think they're supposed to just deal with these levels of stress. There are a few intrusive thoughts: being depressed, imposter syndrome, self-hatred. I'm sure there are more, but these are the ones I can think of right now. People often say that they have really unpleasant and sometimes violent intrusive thoughts. This is actually a lot more common than people think. It does not mean that you're violent or disturbed. The number of clients I've had who have told me about being sexually abused as a child is astounding and heartbreaking. And while it is absolutely not acceptable that they were ever violated, it is so incredibly common that most people don't realize how many others have experienced it. Almost none of them realize that it is not their fault until it's pointed out by someone else. The number of clients who said they tried to tell their parents/caregivers about what happened and were silenced is also incredibly high. If this happened to you, please know it is not your fault, and it's not okay that your caregiver did not believe you, or that they didn't take action to protect you from the offender. Healing is possible once you open up and start sharing with others who can validate your experience. The sudden urge to jump off a cliff or a tall building when you are standing on the edge. Edit. Similarly, many males and a few females too have confessed of having an uncontrollable urge to smack/pinch or grab a nice butt as soon as they see one within a hand's reach. I've been absolutely terrified of seeing a therapist. I won't bore you guys with my backstory, but a few months ago I came out of a daydream at work, trying to stab my jugular with a fork. I quit my job and lied to my roommates about it. I don't know what's more embarrassing, subconsciously trying to take my own life, or having to tell someone about it and fearing their response. It doesn't matter whether emotions or issues are normal by societal standards or not. If they are emotionally taxing and are important for you, it needs to be addressed. Normal does not matter in the scheme of therapy. Personally, it shouldn't matter ever. Don't be embarrassed to talk to your therapist. Still loving someone who hurt them. Masturbating. 90% of my teenage clients think they have a sexual or porn addiction because they masturbate almost every day. Every single one has parents who are too uncomfortable to talk about sex. Use fear to deter their sexual activity. Use religious sin as a deterrent. or a combination of these. My colleagues and I find ourselves teaching sex education to them, and explaining what an addiction really is. So far only one does it enough that it has a detrimental effect on their relationships and responsibilities.